Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The day Eloise dropped the wine glass at Naomi's engagement dinner, she wasn't clumsy, she was starving. Not the hunger that rattles in the belly alone, but the kind that echoes from the bones, birthed from exhaustion and swallowed pride. The room was gilded in gold and white, soft piano music tickling the corners, and guests so polished they looked like they'd been born under chandeliers. Eloise stood in the shadows, barefoot in borrowed shoes half a size too small, holding a tray of champagne flutes and scented tea like she'd always been part of the furniture. Naomi hadn't even introduced her to the guests. She only said, "Please, ensure everything runs smoothly, especially the table arrangements." It was the same voice Eloise remembered from childhood, except now it wore makeup and sharpness like war paint. When the glass slipped and shattered against the marble tiles, the room hushed. Heads turned like swiveling door hinges. Naomi didn't rush to her aid. Instead, she laughed and said, "Old habits die hard," as though Eloise had always been a clumsy inconvenience, not a girl who once took beatings for her in school. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it cut like tiny blades drawn across soft skin. At that moment, Eloise knew something irreparable had happened, not just to the wineglass, but to the bond they once called sisterhood. Merlot's Bend had once been the stage for their dreams, two girls crafting castles from dust and hope, swearing never to forget the smell of boiled maize and charcoal that flavored their childhood. Naomi and Eloise used to run barefoot through puddles, stealing mangoes and singing out-of-tune hymns with voices loud enough to wake the birds. But time had a way of sweeping people into rivers they never intended to swim. Naomi left early, whisked away by an aunt in the city. Eloise stayed behind, lost her mother to typhoid, her father to heartbreak, and her home to termites and unpaid rent. She worked in a tailoring shop that couldn't afford thread sometimes. Her hands became the story her tongue didn't tell, calloused, precise, busy from dawn till dusk. One day, she received a parcel wrapped in glossy gold paper, an invitation to Naomi's engagement. Written in Naomi's tidy cursive was a personal note. "I need someone who understands elegance to help make this event special. I thought of you." Eloise had read it thrice, convinced it was a mistake. Her heart fluttered like a bird in a cage, hope, maybe even love for the past, but wrapped tightly in hesitation. She didn't own a decent pair of shoes, nor a bag that hadn't frayed at the edges. But she went. Foolishly. She went. And the first thing Naomi said when she saw her was, "Oh, you came. Great. We could use a hand in the kitchen." That wasn't nostalgia. That was strategy. And Eloise had walked into it like a lamb unaware of the butcher's blade. The house was enormous, ceiling so high it could hide secrets, windows so clear they didn't belong in a town where dust knew everyone by name. It smelled of imported oils, lavender wax, and the kind of money that didn't blink when wasted. Naomi had changed her skin like a snake. She spoke with a lilt now, walked like the world owed her gentle applause. Her fiancé Vernon was kind, but distant, the sort of man who wore silence like a tailored suit. On the second night, Eloise was folding napkins in the corner when he asked her if she was one of Naomi's cousins. Naomi's voice sliced in with practiced charm. "Oh no, just a helper from Merlot. She used to know me, back when things were simpler." The room chuckled. Eloise didn't. Her heart had sunken like a stone in thick water. Every word Naomi spoke felt dipped in syrup but laced with vinegar. She no longer saw Eloise as a friend, but as a mirror she wished to shatter, one that reminded her of things she now pretended she never lived. The kindness in Naomi's past had been folded and stored in a box, and Eloise had become the box only needed when something old had to be handled with care. But the irony was cruel. For all the marble and muslin and manicured lies, Naomi still couldn't hold her own laughter without Eloise's old jokes. And yet, here Eloise was, setting tables while guests praised a love story she knew had been edited for glamour. Each morning, Naomi would toss commands like crumbs, never lifting a finger. Eloise, wipe the veranda before breakfast. Make sure the roses are watered. Don't forget Vernon's green tea. She didn't ask. She ordered. And Eloise, though bruised in spirit, obeyed. She told herself she was helping. That maybe, somewhere beneath Naomi's painted pride, there was still that girl who once shared sugar cubes and secret crushes, but that illusion peeled away when Naomi began inviting her wealthy friends over and introducing her as the best house girl I've ever had. They smiled politely, but their eyes danced with judgment. One even tipped her. Naomi watched with amusement and whispered, "You should be flattered. They're quite generous." It was like swallowing boiling water, smiling while it burned. Naomi would often mock her under her breath, tiny jabs like, "You really haven't changed, have you?" Or, "Still wearing your emotions like old perfume." Sometimes Vernon would glance at her, puzzled, sensing something unspoken, but he never asked. Eloise would nod, clear the dishes, and disappear before her tears became obvious. Because no matter how strong a woman is, even iron weeps under the rain long enough. Eloise now lived in a room without windows, in a house that used to be a dream, with a friend who now dressed her wounds with salt. And somehow that hurt worse than hunger. Naomi's mansion had the kind of silence that was louder than thunder. It wasn't the peaceful hush of comfort, it was the heavy kind, full of unspoken things, where the air felt thick enough to chew. Eloise had now stayed a full week, though it felt like she'd aged a year. The walls were painted ivory, but the atmosphere was cold steel. She slept in a small corner room tucked near the laundry area, a place Naomi described with a sweet smile as cozy and out of the way. There was a single window, sealed shut, and a tiny ceiling fan that hummed like an irritated bee. Each morning began before the sun rose. Naomi had provided a strict schedule, handwritten with bullet points that looked like tiny prison bars. Breakfast arrangements, flower trimming, slippers outside Vernon's room. It wasn't the work that broke Eloise. It was the manner. Naomi issued instructions without looking her in the eye, like a queen too bored to acknowledge her own shadow. Once, Naomi asked her to help zip up a dress, then remarked how those fingers still smell of starch and onions. Eloise smiled through it, but it was the kind of smile that belonged at funerals, the kind that hid bruises no one could see. Even the walls seemed to flinch when Naomi passed. The worst part wasn't the commands or the humiliation. It was that Naomi did it all with a silky tone, like sugar disguising poison. Every insult was wrapped in velvet. And Eloise, like a stubborn sponge, kept soaking in the bile, refusing to spill a drop. Pride wouldn't let her. It was on the fourth morning that Vernon caught her humming in the garden. The sun had barely risen, and she was trimming the hibiscus hedge, trying to remember the feel of soil that didn't belong to someone else. The hymn was one she used to sing with Naomi beneath the mango tree in their old compound, a soft tune, wordless, more feeling than melody. Vernon had come out with his coffee, unnoticed, and stood a few feet away, listening like a man hearing a familiar story retold in a stranger's voice. When she noticed him, her fingers froze, the shears clamped midair. "That song," he said, not smiling, not stern, just curious. "It's beautiful. You wrote it?" Eloise shook her head, fumbling with words, unsure if she was being accused or admired. Naomi appeared moments later, already dressed for brunch, eyes catching the scene like a match near dry paper. "Darling," she said to Vernon, "Eloise has a good memory for old songs. That's all it is. Village echoes." Her laugh was light, but her eyes dug into Eloise like nails. Vernon nodded absently, sipped his coffee, and walked back inside. That was the first moment Naomi looked genuinely afraid, not of Eloise, but of the past walking barefoot into her marble future. That night, Naomi called Eloise into her room and asked her plainly never to sing in the house again. "It's not good for the ambiance," she said. "This isn't Merlot's Bend." Eloise nodded, but inside her something began to burn, a quiet fire, slow but stubborn. In the following days, Naomi doubled her efforts to keep Eloise invisible. When friends came over, Eloise was told to enter through the back door and not speak unless spoken to. Naomi would offer exaggerated tales of their childhood, painting Eloise as the comic relief in a tragic circus. "Oh, she used to wear socks with slippers," Naomi laughed once, and cried when a chicken chased her. The women howled. Eloise stood nearby with a tray of drinks, wondering how laughter could sound so cruel. She knew Naomi wasn't just telling stories, she was rewriting history. Dignity, it seemed, had no place in Naomi's kingdom unless it was gilded and mute. But Eloise kept her peace. She'd learned that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's just a shield. One day, while ironing Vernon's shirts, she found a book tucked in the pocket of his blazer, a book of old folk poems, with Naomi's name scribbled on the inside cover. Except the handwriting wasn't Naomi's. It was hers. The same curls on the T's, the same looped E's. She remembered now. She'd given Naomi that book for her 16th birthday, copied every poem by hand with ink that bled through the pages. Naomi had kept it but claimed it. Eloise stared at the book, heart and knotted fist. It wasn't just her labor Naomi stole. It was her light, her little flickers of gold. She placed the book back. No tears, no shaking. Just a quiet, steely decision that this season of swallowing was coming to an end. The turning point came in an unguarded moment. Naomi had left her phone on the kitchen stool while Eloise cleaned the glass island. A message popped up. Vernon's name lit the screen, followed by a line that sent ice down her spine. "You hide too much. I feel like I don't even know you." Eloise didn't read further. She didn't need to. The cracks in Naomi's polished empire were showing, and behind the gold leaf was rust. That evening, Naomi was unusually quiet during dinner. Her eyes darted between Vernon and Eloise like someone watching two candles burn unevenly, unsure which flame would go out first. Vernon was cordial but distant, chewing slowly, like the food needed decoding. After dinner, as Eloise cleared the plates, Naomi followed her into the kitchen, her voice low but biting. "You think I don't see it? The little looks, the quiet songs. You want him to feel sorry for you?" Eloise turned, holding a glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I didn't ask for your pity, and I certainly don't want his." Naomi's eyes widened. It was the first time Eloise had spoken back, and like a cracked mirror suddenly revealing its true reflection, Naomi saw her, really saw her, not as a housemaid or a leftover from a past life, but as the only person who knew the truth about where she came from. Naomi's lips curled. "Then remember your place, because pity's the only thing you've got left." Eloise said nothing. But her silence that night wasn't a retreat, it was a countdown. Naomi had always been the sort of woman who knew how to stage her life. Every smile was calculated, every tear rehearsed. She knew how to shift her voice just enough to sound vulnerable in front of Vernon, and sharp as vinegar the moment his back was turned. But what she hadn't anticipated was that Vernon was beginning to notice the cracks between her rehearsals and reality. The days grew tenser, and even the house, once humming with scented candles and distant jazz, now felt like it was holding its breath. Eloise moved quietly, as always, though her silence had shifted from submission to something heavier, more defiant, like a tide pulling back before a storm. Naomi could feel it. One evening, while preparing the dining room for a small gathering, Naomi snapped at her for folding the napkins incorrectly. "This isn't a local wedding," she hissed, grabbing the cloth. Eloise didn't flinch, didn't speak. She simply handed over the rest of the stack and walked away. Naomi's hand trembled slightly. Not from guilt. She'd long since trained her heart to wear armor, but from the haunting realization that she was losing control. For so long, she had kept Eloise under her heel, a reminder of who she used to be and how far she had come. But lately, Eloise's eyes no longer looked upward. They looked straight back, and Naomi, for all her pomp and posture, felt exposed. One Saturday afternoon, with the house empty and the rain tapping softly on the glass panes, Eloise found herself alone in the upstairs library, a room she usually avoided, not out of fear, but because it reeked of Naomi's staged sophistication. Shelves upon shelves of untouched books sat like ornaments, their spines unbroken, titles carefully curated for show. But as Eloise dusted the edges of a corner table, her hand grazed a familiar shape, a small wooden box, tucked behind an antique globe. Curiosity tugged at her fingers, and when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were trinkets from their shared past, a friendship bracelet they had made during a school picnic, a faded photo of them eating pawpaw slices in matching braids, and a note written in her teenage scrawl, "Naomi, we'll never forget where we started." Eloise sat back, stunned. So Naomi had kept these? Despite everything? The room felt like it tilted slightly. She didn't know whether to feel betrayed or honored. Before she could decide, the door creaked open, and Vernon stepped in. He froze, then offered a quiet smile. "Didn't know anyone actually opened that box," he said. Eloise closed the lid gently. "Neither did I." He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, eyes scanning her face like someone trying to read a book written in a forgotten language. "How long have you known Naomi?" he asked. The question was simple, but behind it lay a minefield. Eloise exhaled, long enough to remember who she was before she became who she is. Vernon didn't respond immediately. He only nodded, slowly. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not affection, not pity, but a shared unease about the woman who held the keys to both their lives. Naomi was watching from the hallway. She'd meant to call Vernon downstairs, but had paused when she heard voices. The sight of them, Eloise seated calmly, Vernon leaning forward, listening, sent her blood boiling. She remembered when she was the only one he looked at like that. Now, even the air between them felt charged in a language Naomi no longer spoke. That night, she didn't confront either of them. Instead, she gathered ammunition the only way she knew how, by turning performance into punishment. The next morning, she arranged a brunch for 6 of her wealthiest friends, ladies with lips as sharp as their heels and minds that love gossip like bees love nectar. She asked Eloise to serve. But she also told the women that Eloise was a family acquaintance who had fallen on hard times and needed a little structure. The implication hung in the air like stale perfume. As Eloise poured wine and cleared dishes, she heard laughter following her. Not the joyful kind. This laughter was knotted with mockery, every giggle a pebble aimed at her pride. One woman dropped her napkin and said loudly, "Dear, be careful. That's silk. You probably don't know the difference." Eloise picked it up slowly, handed it back with steady eyes, and replied, "It's okay. I know how to care for fragile things." The woman blinked. Naomi's smile faltered. For the rest of the brunch, the room felt like a string pulled too tight, one snap away from breaking. Naomi realized too late that Eloise wasn't just enduring anymore. She was watching, waiting, choosing her moment. That moment came sooner than anyone expected. That evening, as the guests left and the dishes clinked in the sink, Vernon found Eloise on the back porch, her apron damp, her eyes distant. He offered her a glass of orange juice. No words, just a small gesture. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and that spark, the one Naomi feared, was no longer imagined. Naomi saw it from the kitchen window. A rage, cold and elegant, began to form in her chest. She didn't scream or cry. She planned. The next morning, she confronted Eloise not with anger, but with poison disguised as grace. "We need to talk," she began, inviting her to sit in the same library where the trinket box still rested. "I think it's time we redefined your role here." Eloise tilted her head, quiet. Naomi continued, "You'll move into the servant quarters properly. No more mingling during meals. It's better for appearances." Her voice was syrup, but her eyes were fire. Eloise smiled faintly. "Of course. I wouldn't want to disturb the ambiance." Naomi's face twitched. She expected tears, begging, not composure. And that unnerved her more than rage ever could. As Eloise walked out of the room, Vernon stepped in. "Everything all right?" he asked. Naomi turned to him, blinking slowly. "Perfect," she said, but it wasn't. The balance she had carefully orchestrated was tilting, and Eloise, once her shadow, now walked in her light, and Naomi was the one fading from view. The house had grown too quiet, and in that silence Naomi's mind spun like a loose wheel on a rainy road. She paced through the corridors like a queen haunted by whispers, stopping occasionally to adjust flower vases that didn't need adjusting or refluff pillows that had already been fluffed. Vernon had become unpredictable, his smiles thinner, his voice thoughtful, his eyes wandering to places Naomi couldn't follow. He barely asked for anything anymore, and that frightened her more than if he had yelled. The day he stopped requesting green tea in the mornings was the day she knew she was losing him. Not to Eloise, Naomi would rather bite her own tongue than believe that, but to something deeper. She had spent years building a castle of appearances, but now the walls trembled each time Vernon glanced too long at someone else's truth. Naomi's friends had begun to whisper too. They noticed how quiet Vernon had become, how Eloise was still present long after the engagement had ended, how the air around Naomi was no longer the scented breeze of confidence, but the damp chill of desperation. Naomi tried to talk herself out of fear. "She's just a maid," she would mutter to her reflection, adjusting her pearl earrings. "I made her." But even the mirror refused to believe her. It only stared back, cold and honest, like a loyal traitor revealing secrets no one else dared to say aloud. Eloise, meanwhile, had reached a place inside herself that no longer recoiled at insults. She had learned to breathe in mockery and exhale resilience. She moved through the house like smoke, soft and visible in the corners, yet capable of suffocating even the strongest flame. Each task Naomi assigned was carried out with care, not because Eloise sought approval, but because she understood that excellence was its own quiet revenge. The more Naomi tried to belittle her, the more Vernon noticed the difference between glitter and gold, and Eloise had become gold refined by fire. One afternoon, as she swept the front porch, Vernon returned from a business meeting and paused beside her. "That song you sang in the garden," he began. "Do you remember the lyrics?" Eloise straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "There were no lyrics," she said gently. "Just a feeling." Vernon nodded, as if that answer told him more than words ever could. Naomi saw them from the stairwell, her hands clutching the banister so tightly the veins in her wrists screamed. She waited until Vernon went upstairs before cornering Eloise in the kitchen. "You're forgetting yourself," she said, each word as sharp as the edge of broken china. "You forget I took you in. You forget whose roof you sleep under." Eloise looked up from the pot she was scrubbing, her eyes steady. "I remember everything, Naomi, including the times you slept in my mother's bed when your own had rats in it." Naomi's face twisted, not in anger, but in something worse, shame. And Eloise didn't wait for a response. She turned off the tap and walked away, her silence louder than any door slam. The storm Naomi had long feared finally arrived on the night of the charity dinner. It was supposed to be her big moment, an event planned for weeks, with photographers, influencers, and a speech Vernon was meant to deliver beside her. The hall had been decorated to perfection, her gown tailored within an inch of flawlessness, her makeup blended like a painting. but Vernon didn't show. Instead, a message was delivered discreetly. He'd been called away on urgent business. Naomi read it with a frozen smile and finished the evening like a woman performing her own eulogy. The guests clapped, the cameras flashed, but Naomi's hands felt like ice beneath her gloves. When she returned home, the house was silent, except for the soft hum of a song being played in the library. She followed the sound, unsure whether it was real or imagined, and found Vernon seated on the floor, flipping through the poetry book Eloise had once discovered. Eloise sat nearby, not speaking, just present. Naomi's entrance turned the air brittle. Vernon stood up, placing the book back. "Didn't expect you back so early," he said. Naomi smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "Neither did I." She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She simply turned around and walked to her room, each step echoing with the weight of years built on borrowed light. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the chandelier above her no longer looking elegant, only heavy, like a crown too large for the head that wears it. The next morning, Naomi did something unexpected. She invited her usual circle of friends over for breakfast, just 5 women, all clad in designer loungewear and armed with curiosities sharper than their acrylic nails. She welcomed them with false cheer, serving croissants and mango mimosas like she hadn't cried herself to sleep. Then, as Eloise entered with a tray of fresh fruit, Naomi raised her glass. "Ladies," she said, voice bright, "you've all been asking about my friend Eloise. Today, I want to show you just how versatile she is." She turned to Eloise with a sweet, venom-laced smile. "Would you do us the honor and sing that old hymn? The one Vernon likes so much?" The room fell into a hush, 5 sets of eyes darting between Naomi's lipstick grin and Eloise's composed silence. Eloise placed the tray down slowly. She said nothing. She just stood tall, took a breath, and sang. No theatrics, no vengeance. Just that same haunting tune, soft as rain, raw as truth. The sound floated through the room like a spell, washing over painted faces and perfumed scorn. When she finished, there was no applause, just stillness. Naomi's glass trembled slightly in her hand. One friend muttered, "Beautiful," as if confessing a crime. And in that moment, Naomi realized the truth she had long buried. Eloise had never needed to rise above her. She had only needed to rise. And now that she had, there was no going back. In the days that followed Eloise's impromptu performance, the atmosphere in the house hung like wet laundry, damp, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Naomi, who once strutted through the halls like a crowned peacock, now moved with a caution she didn't recognize in herself. She had never been one to feel outshone in her own home, but lately the walls whispered things she could no longer silence. The staff walked a little more respectfully around Eloise. Even the gardener began greeting her first. Vernon, though still polite to Naomi, had grown emotionally evasive. His words were careful now, his tone measured, as if guarding against stepping on landmines that Naomi herself had buried. He had returned late from the office one evening, hair ruffled, tie undone, and instead of going straight to their bedroom, he stopped at the laundry where Eloise was folding bedsheets. Naomi heard their voices, light, easy, familiar. He asked her about the song. She told him it reminded her of her mother. He said it reminded him of honesty. Naomi stood frozen at the top of the stairs, and for the first time in her life, she felt like a guest in her own marriage. The image of Vernon laughing so freely with someone who had once served wine with trembling hands became a thorn under her skin, and though her lips never parted, her heart screamed, "He's slipping away." That night, Naomi didn't sleep. Her eyes roamed the ceiling like a prisoner counting cracks in the wall. She rose at dawn and stood by the mirror, searching her face for the woman who once believed she had it all. The pearls on her dresser mocked her, the perfumes, the silk scarves, the designer handbags, all of them lay there like souvenirs from a joyless kingdom. Naomi wasn't angry that Vernon admired Eloise. No, the wound ran deeper. What knotted her insides was the knowledge that Eloise had become everything she once claimed to be: authentic, graceful, quietly dignified. For years, Naomi had sculpted a life of glitter, hoping it would convince the world that she was gold. But now Eloise, with her calloused hands and unscripted poise, had become a mirror she could no longer cover. In a final act of desperation, Naomi arranged a private dinner for Vernon. No guests, no speeches, no staff. She wore a velvet dress that clung to her like a secret, lit candles with trembling fingers, and played the softest jazz they used to dance to when they were newly engaged. But when Vernon arrived, he barely noticed. He ate quietly, offered a compliment about the wine, and excused himself before dessert. She called after him, "Vernon, are we okay?" He paused at the doorway, back turned. "We're living under the same roof. That's not the same as being okay." And just like that, the walls of Naomi's curated reality began to crumble. She had built a palace without foundation, and now it was caving in. Eloise began to feel the shift too, though she did not revel in it. Power, to her, had never been about who gave orders or who received praise. It was about inner peace, the quiet confidence that doesn't require an audience. But the house had turned into a theater of glances and footsteps. Naomi avoided her now, speaking only through cold instructions written on sticky notes left in the kitchen. Vernon, on the other hand, had grown more open, asking questions about her childhood, her late parents, even her dreams. She shared only what she was comfortable with, never overstaying her welcome in those conversations. It was Vernon who brought up the idea. "There's a position opening at our community outreach center in South Pine," he said one evening as they bumped into each other by the herb garden. "Music workshops, literacy programs. I think you'd be perfect." Eloise blinked, unsure if he was offering or just dreaming out loud. He smiled, as if reading her thoughts. "You have to decide now. Just think about it." That night, she wrote the address on a scrap of napkin and folded it into her purse. Not as a promise, but as a possibility. Still, she hesitated to leave. Not because she owed Naomi anything, but because part of her still grieved the girl Naomi used to be. The girl who once held her hand in a thunderstorm and whispered, "We're all we've got." But that girl was gone now, replaced by a woman trapped in lace and lies. On a breezy Friday morning, the truth finally walked in through the front door wearing polished shoes and a purposeful gait. Vernon had invited a friend over, a lawyer, clean-shaven, briefcase in hand. Naomi wasn't informed. When she descended the stairs and saw them in the study, something inside her snapped like overstretched thread. "What is this?" she asked, her voice brittle. Vernon stood up calmly, met her gaze, and said, "We're restructuring. I need to be more involved in South Pine, and some of our household routines have to change." Naomi laughed bitterly. "So you bring a lawyer into my home?" Vernon's expression didn't waver. "It's not your home, Naomi. It's ours. But for a while now, it's only reflected you." The lawyer placed a file on the desk. Naomi didn't open it. She couldn't. Her hands refused to cooperate. Later that day, Eloise received her letter of recommendation, signed by Vernon, stamped with the company's seal. Naomi watched her pack a single bag. No shouting, no begging, just quiet acceptance from both sides. As Eloise reached the door, Naomi whispered, "So that's it?" Eloise turned, not in triumph, but in calm finality. "You taught me many things, Naomi, but the most valuable lesson was knowing when to stop holding on to what only wants to break you." Then she walked out, not away from something, but toward herself. South Pine was nothing like Merlot's Bend or Naomi's mansion in the city. It breathed at its own pace. The mornings were quiet and hopeful, like pages waiting to be written. The streets smelled of freshly baked bread and sun-warmed stone, not designer candles and floor polish. Eloise arrived with a suitcase that didn't creak and a heart that finally did. Her new role at the community center wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. She taught children how to sing in harmony, how to write their own lyrics, how to let their voices echo without apology. The room was always filled with laughter, the occasional off-key note, and the kind of energy that came from truth, not performance. The piano keys were old and stubborn, but they sang for her. Her students, bright-eyed girls and curious boys, didn't know her past, didn't see her as the girl who once served mimosas with trembling hands. They saw her as Miss Eloise, the woman who could turn silence into symphony. Each time she stood before them, baton in hand or humming beside the keyboard, she felt pieces of herself returning. She wasn't rebuilding what Naomi broke. She was becoming someone new entirely. Her past didn't vanish, but it no longer weighed her steps. Like a snake shedding skin, she moved lighter. And in that lightness, she found joy. Weeks passed, then months. Naomi's name stopped echoing in her mind. Vernon never reached out again, not directly. But once, a delivery van arrived outside the center. Inside were fresh notebooks, new musical instruments, and a card that simply read, "For the melodies that deserve better walls." There was no name, but Eloise knew. She didn't smile or cry. She simply placed the items in the storage closet and kept moving. Her life no longer spun around other people's shadows. She found a small apartment above a bakery owned by an old widow who wore too much blush and always played jazz records during storms. The floorboards creaked like they had stories to tell, and the windows welcomed every sunrise like a guest long awaited. Eloise furnished it with hand-me-downs and market finds, but nothing in the space was borrowed dignity. It was hers, earned, loved, lived in. On weekends, she walked barefoot on the balcony with a cup of tea in hand, humming the same hymn Naomi once silenced. She no longer sang it to be remembered. She sang it because it belonged to her. Her voice, once choked in marble halls, now flowed freely in small rooms filled with purpose. In that quiet town, surrounded by strangers who didn't care about past labels or old wounds, Eloise began to feel something she hadn't known in years: safety. Naomi, on the other hand, remained surrounded by chandeliers that no longer sparkled and gowns that no longer fit like pride. The house felt emptier now, despite being full of furniture. Vernon spent more nights away, claiming work, always work. Their conversations had become transactional. "What time is the driver coming?" Or, "Did you confirm the booking?" Spoken with the politeness of strangers sharing an elevator. One evening, Naomi sat at her vanity, brushing her hair for no one, and stared at the reflection that had stopped flattering her. She had worn so many versions of herself trying to escape the one girl she used to be, that now, stripped of pretense, she wasn't sure who was staring back. The walls echoed too loudly, and the silence mocked her. She tried hosting brunches again, but her friends had grown tired of rehearsed glamour and thin gossip. The laughter always felt forced, like a joke told one too many times. One night, after everyone had left, she wandered into the library and opened the wooden box Eloise had once discovered. The friendship bracelet was still there, brittle with time, and the picture of two girls holding pawpaw slices. Naomi traced her fingers over the edges, wondering when envy had begun to take the place of gratitude. Perhaps it was when she realized Eloise's love had no agenda. Or maybe it was the day Vernon looked at Eloise and saw the one thing Naomi couldn't fake: peace. Then came the day Naomi visited South Pine. No announcement, no fanfare. She wore a scarf, sunglasses, and a jacket that belonged more to discretion than fashion. She sat quietly at the back of the community center's hall, watching children sway as Eloise led them through a soft chorus. Eloise hadn't seen her yet. She moved with grace, not showmanship. She corrected gently, encouraged softly. Naomi felt something in her chest crack, like a branch breaking under snow it didn't see coming. When the session ended and the children filed out, Naomi stood by the door, unsure. Eloise saw her, froze for a breath, then walked over. No bitterness in her stride, no triumph either. Just a woman meeting a past that finally knew how to knock. "You look well," Naomi said, voice almost inaudible. "So do you," Eloise replied, and in that moment Naomi realized how much weight rested in kindness that didn't have to be offered. They stood there, two women with the same roots but very different reign. Naomi didn't ask for forgiveness. Eloise didn't give a speech. They stood in silence until Naomi whispered, "I didn't expect you to become this." Eloise nodded, not with arrogance, but truth. "Neither did I." And with that, Naomi turned and left, not broken, not fixed, just facing forward for the first time in years. As the door closed, Eloise turned back to the hall, her fingers brushing the edge of the piano. Outside, the rain had started. Inside, she began to sing. Sometimes, the people who walk through your past with you may not have the heart to walk beside you in your future. Not every shared childhood guarantees a shared destiny. Learn to recognize when loyalty becomes self-betrayal. Don't shrink to fit into places that can't honor your growth. You are not meant to stay small just because someone else fears your light. Even if they try to bury your worth, let your peace speak louder than revenge, because nothing silences mockery like a life that blossoms anyway. May you never be used as a stepping stone for someone else's pride. May your kindness never become the rope they use to pull you down. I pray that every place you were mocked, you will return standing tall, not in bitterness, but in grace. May doors open for you, not by force, but by favor. May you walk into seasons where your worth is recognized without needing to shout. May those who wrote you off live long enough to see you rise. May your peace be loud, your joy be full, and your future be far brighter than your past. In Jesus' name, Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.